Dodgy paper.
Hello, I'm Dodgy Roger, the Pulp Professor, and I'm here to teach you how to make handmade recycled paper. I've been making paper for almost 10 years now, and it's a super relaxing, satisfying, and inspiring process that's fairly simple at its core, but each step of the process can be refined, producing a better resulting sheet of paper. You don't need heaps of equipment to get started, and in this video, I'm going to show you each step of the process, the tools you'll need, and different tips and tricks to make paper from your paper waste. Before we get into making paper, here's lesson number 1. Use what you have. I love the process of repurposing and recycling, whether it's for paper making, creativity, or life in general. Make use of what you have, repurpose something that's unused, or fix something that's broken. Always try to go for a second-hand option when thinking about the equipment and tools you'll need for the papermaking process. All right, let's get into part 1. What you'll need: equipment, tools, and materials. Mould and DECKLE, the essential tool of the paper maker, used to form sheets of paper from paper pulp. It's made up of 2 equal-sized parts. We have the mould and the DECKLE. This is an A6 sized mould. These are my A6 starter kits available on the Dodgy shop. The mould has a mesh stretched over the top to help us form each sheet of paper. And the DECKLE is placed on top to make sure the pulp and water mixture stays in there while we're making each sheet. Here we have an A4 mould and DECKLE, one of my old original ones from around 9 years ago. This is made from hardwood, but I've used chicken wire mesh on here. Here we have another A4 mould and DECKLE, but this time with a polyester blend. Here we have a giant A2 mould and DECKLE, the largest sheet size that I make. This one, the mesh is made from stainless steel, super fine stainless steel. And here we have some more experimental sizes, a 3D shape, and a triangle for making triangular sheets. Making your own mould and DECKLE is a fairly simple project. You'll need 2 of the same size frame. One you keep as the DECKLE, and the other you'll want to stretch a mesh over the top like so. Here's a few different options of materials to use for the mesh. We have chicken wire, fly screen, stainless steel, polyester blends such as old curtains, but really any material that will allow water to pass through while keeping the pulp on the top will do. So experiment with anything that you have and see what works. If woodworking is not your thing, think about things that exist already that you could use, such as old picture frames. Otherwise, moulds and DECKLEs are fairly easy to find to purchase online, and I also have the A6 starter kit and some A5 kits as well available on my shop. So the next thing you're going to need is a container, vat, or tub to allow you to mix all your recycled paper pulp with water and dip your mould and DECKLE to form each sheet. When thinking about what tub to use, obviously it needs to be able to fit your mould and DECKLE inside. So if you're working with a small A6 mould, then you only need a small container like so. I use one large container for all my paper making. This fits up to A2 size. I suggest using a plastic tub for your paper making process, but if you don't have access to one, you could use your kitchen sink or even a bucket. Another thing to think about when getting ready to make paper is you'll want to have a nice smooth flat area next to your paper making tub to allow you to flip each sheet and sponge and press. I'm using a tile I found on Hard Rubbish here, but really any smooth flat surface will do. Even if you're setting up on a portable table, just the table next to your tub will be all right. Hot tip, An old oven tray will be the perfect pressing zone. So place this next to your tub, and then when it comes to making each sheet, you can flip this over, sponge and press, and all the water will stay contained in one zone. The next thing you'll want to think about before getting into paper making is you're going to need a drying area. I have this amazing, beautiful, big drying rack that I got off Gumtree, but when I first started making paper, I would just lay the sheets out on my studio floor or use old bits of plywood to place each sheet on to dry. Other options for a drying area would be outside on the grass on a nice sunny day. A lot of paper makers hang each sheet on a string using pegs. This is a really good space-saving technique. If you have a washing line where you live, that could be a really good drying zone. Just peg each sheet up and let them dry. I guess the key for a drying area is make use of the space that you have and try to maximize the amount of sheets that can be dried in that zone. The next thing you'll need is transfer material. Once each sheet has been pulled, you need a transfer material to press and hold each sheet while it dries. Traditionally, in handmade paper making, materials like felt, cloth, or linen were used to transfer each sheet, and these will all work perfectly fine. In my process, I use sheets of recycled acetate donated by a local screen printing business. Shout outs to Redwood Press. The texture of the transfer material will transfer onto your sheet of paper, so think about that when picking what material you'd like to use. Acetate is super smooth, so one side of your resulting sheet will be super duper smooth. You can also think about this creatively. If you were to use material that has a pattern or a texture, that pattern will transfer onto your sheet. Recycled acetate is kind of hard to come by, so one really good thing to use is any old material you have lying around at home, such as bed sheets, old t-shirts, clothes, exercise gear. Any kind of old material will be fun to try. For this video, I'm going to cut up some of this t-shirt and use this to transfer the sheets. For each sheet of paper that you want to make, you'll need one piece of transfer material. These can be reused once the sheets are dry, but for your paper making session, make sure you have enough transfer sheets for the amount of paper you'd like to make. Okay, now let's talk about the most important ingredient to recycled paper, paper waste. There is enough paper on planet Earth already. There's definitely no shortage of paper waste. It's everywhere you look, and all of it pretty much can be used to turn back into recycled paper. You definitely already have paper waste ready to go at your home, studio, office, wherever you are, such as food packaging, egg cartons, cardboard food packaging, paper waste, junk mail, old books, instruction manuals, printer waste, envelopes, old comics, old drawings, shopping lists, love letters, notes, receipts. There is so much paper waste that can be repurposed into handmade paper. Any paper that you can rip by hand can be turned into a pulp to make sheets. The rip test is super important as we want to rule out any coated paper, such as this piece of packaging that has a plastic coating on top of the printing. We don't want plastic in our paper sheets, so try to avoid these. Literally anything that was paper can be turned back into paper. Now that you have your paper waste, we're going to need to turn it into a pulp. If you want to kick it old school and do it like they did thousands of years ago, then no machinery is needed. You'll take your paper waste, mix it with some water, and stomp and mash it down to a pulp with whatever tools you have access to. But to save time and make a really high quality pulp, I recommend using a blender. This is your pretty standard kitchen style blender for smoothies and other things, but it's really great at turning paper waste into a pulp. Another option is a portable smoothie blender. Really good for making small amounts of pulp or paper making on the go. When I first started making paper, I would go to local op shops and markets and garage sales, and every time I saw a blender, I would buy it. There's lots of secondhand options out there, and you definitely don't want to use your kitchen blender that you use for food for paper pulp, unless you wash it really well in between. This is my pride and joy, a commercial style blender that has a closing hood so it doesn't sound as loud. And it's quite powerful, probably 2 or 3 times more powerful than an average kitchen blender. We're almost ready to get started, but here's a few other things you'll need. Probably the most important is a sponge, to sponge and press each sheet as you make them. Some gloves to keep your hands dry. And here's the dodgiest tip. Get some dowel or wood that you can place on top of your tub, like so. This will help rest your mold when you're making paper, so you don't get water everywhere else. Now that we've gone through all the tools and equipment you'll need, let's make some paper. Step 1, gather your paper waste. For this demonstration, I'm going to use an egg carton, an instruction manual on thin printed paper, and an envelope. If you're planning on having a paper making session, I recommend soaking your paper beforehand. Even if it's just for a couple of hours, this is going to help soften the paper and make the blending and pulping easier. If you're planning on using really thick paper waste, such as this thick cardstock, then I recommend soaking it even the day before for 24 hours, just so it will be super soft. But if you're using really thin paper, like these old book pages or the printed paper waste, then soaking isn't super necessary, but every little bit of soaking just means that the blender will have an easier time blending it up. Step 2, rip up all your paper waste. I'm going to take a small container, not the same tub that I'm using to make the paper, but one which I can place all the ripped paper waste and add some water in before I pulp it up. Let's rip up all the paper. You'll want to rip them into small-ish chunks, maybe 2 to 3 centimeters square. You could also use a shredder to save some time. Let's add in the envelope. The egg carton. And some of these book pages. Okay, now that it's all ripped up, we're going to add some water, and just to make sure that it's covering all of the paper waste. Nice. While that's soaking, the next thing you need to do is add water to your paper making tub, container, or vat. This is quite a large tub, so it's only filled about 1/4 of the way to the top. In general, I think you should fill your tub or container about halfway up with water for a paper making session. The paper waste has been soaking for 10-15 minutes, and now it's time to blend it up and make pulp. If you're not using a blender, then you're going to take your paper waste, put it in whatever container you're going to be mashing it in, maybe a bucket, add some more water and mash it up. But for this video, we're going to use the blender. So we're going to take the jug and we're going to add our paper waste along with water to blend it up. I like to follow the rule of 1/3 paper waste to 2/3 water when blending. This goes for any size jug, any size blender, even the small one, big one like this 4.5 litre. Keeping that ratio of 1/3 to 2/3 means that you won't overload the blender or possibly explode the blender. So let's grab a handful of paper waste. That looks about 1/3 to me. And then we're going to fill it almost to the top with water. We're good to go. Please remember to place the lid on top of the blender jug. And let's blend it up. Okay, so I blended that for around 10 to 15 seconds to create quite a fine pulp. There's not many chunks left in there, and it looks great. Next, you're going to add it to your paper making tub that already has water in there. We're going to pour our pulp into the tub. If you want to make a super fine resulting recycled paper sheet, you'll want to blend the pulp for longer. But if you want to see chunks of what the paper was made from, then you only need a little burst. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to blend up the remaining of my paper waste, the book pages and the carton, the envelope, but I'm only going to zap it for a really quick little burst. So then we'll be able to see those chunks of text and words and graphics, anything that the paper was made from, those chunks will remain. Fill the rest with water. Chuck the lid on. And let's give it a quick burst. So, as you can see, some of these bigger chunks have remained. This will be quite cool because we'll be able to see what the paper was made from. But yeah, that's up to you how chunky you want the paper to be. I recommend maybe if it's your first time, blend the pulp for a bit longer so you just have a nice smooth pulp. Let's add it in. The ratio of pulp to water in your paper making tub is going to affect the thickness of the sheet that you make. The more pulp there is, the thicker the resulting sheet will be. I recommend using 1 jug's worth of paper pulp when you're starting out. That way, you can pull a sheet, see how thick or thin it is, and you can always add more pulp. Okay, I think you're ready to make some paper now. So let's get to it. I'm going to put on my gloves. We're going to take our mould and deckle. Now, as explained earlier, this is the mould and this is the deckle. And the mould should always be mesh side facing upwards. Then the deckle goes on top. Before you make each sheet, you want to make sure that they are lined up. I like to tap them on the bench here or even on the side of the tub, just to make sure they're aligned. As for your hand positioning when pulling sheets of paper, it's best to have both thumbs on the ends and the top of the deckle. Then the rest of your fingers can be holding the mould from the underneath. This helps keep it locked in place. And as you'll see in a moment, when we do the pulling motion, it'll keep it all nicely in place. Okay, now that our mould and deckle is ready to go, it's time to pull your first sheet of paper. Holding our mould and deckle, we're going to mix the tub before each sheet to just disperse the pulp throughout the water. Then we're going to take our mould and deckle and dip it into the mixture and straight back out. You can see there's water draining through. Once that water has stopped draining, we're ready to release the deckle from the mould. So lift it off and place it to the side. Now we have our beautiful first sheet of recycled paper. So nice. Now that the sheet is formed on the mould, we need to use that transfer material to release the sheet and then let it dry. So, for this first one, I'm going to use some recycled acetate. These come with the A6 kits. I'm going to take my transfer material and start from one end of the sheet and slowly lay it down onto the wet pulp. Once it's down, we're going to massage the pulp from side to side. This is pushing out some water and also pushing out any air bubbles that have been created between the pulp and the transfer material. Now our sheet is ready to flip over onto our pressing area. So we take the whole mold, we flip it upside down onto our smooth surface. Then we take our sponge and we sponge out the water. This also helps to compress the sheet, making it a better piece of paper. After we're happy with our sponging and pressing, it's time to release the sheet from the mold. We're going to place one hand on one side, it can be the left or the right, and then with your other hand, you're going to quickly snap the mold away from the sheet. Look at that. So nice. Think about the release from the mold in the same way that you remove a band-aid, quickly and with no hesitation. This will avoid big air bubbles being created or possibly even damaging or missing some of that pulp. It might get stuck to your mold. Once we've released the sheet, we have our very first sheet of handmade recycled paper. And it's connected to the transfer material for now, and that's where it will stay until it's dry. So place this in your drying area, your drying rack, or on a board. For this demonstration, I'm going to place all the sheets on this piece of plywood because I think that's the most accessible way to create a drying rack kind of system. So each sheet will be placed on this board and left to dry for 2 to 3 days. If your first sheet looks nothing like mine, don't worry. No matter how chunky or uneven the surface looks, it's still going to make a beautiful sheet of recycled paper. The more sheets you make, the better you're going to get at this. So let's make some more sheets. If you don't have anything to place across your tub, you can always take the mold and deckle and place it on the edge of the tub, like so. We're going to remove the deckle, take our transfer material, and lay it across. But having something like the dowel across your tub definitely helps keep all the water contained. It's a little bit less messy and makes the process easier. It's time to flip, sponge, and release. Another tool that's very handy for this paper making part of the paper making process is a palette knife or even egg flipper. This will help us remove that transfer material from the flat surface you're working on to be able to handle it and place it in the drying area. Another technique for pulling a sheet rather than dipping it straight up and down into the pulp is to start at a 90-degree angle and then dip in and out. I've made 8 sheets using the recycled acetate as a transfer material. But now I'm going to show you the same process, but using the little cut up piece of an old t-shirt. So this method would apply for any kind of material that you end up using, whether it's old bed sheets, some random old material you've got lying around, or an old t-shirt like I've used. So let's grab our mold and deckle, align the deckle with the mold, give it a little tap, mix our tub. As you can see, in between each sheet, the pulp sinks to the bottom. So just make sure when you're about to pull a sheet, make sure you mix the tub each time. We'll take our mold and deckle, dip it into the pulp and straight back out. Roll over our dowel. Release the deckle. And let's take our t-shirt offcut. And we're going to place this over the sheet. Next, we'll just gently press to push some of that extra water out, but we can quite quickly flip it over onto the pressing area. Then sponge, and release. And now our sheet is beautifully transferred onto this old piece of a t-shirt. Using material like this as transfer sheets means that you can quite easily peg each sheet up onto a string or your washing line to save heaps of room for drying. But if you are going to place them flat, make sure it's on a hard surface so that it stays flat during drying. Let's make a couple more using the t-shirt material. The session's going well so far. I've made 12 A6 sheets, 8 on the acetate and 4 using the t-shirt as transfer material. As you're making paper, each time you pull a sheet, you're removing pulp from the tub. So the ratio is going down and down each time you make a sheet. You'll start to notice the sheet becoming thinner, and I recommend to continue making paper with the same pulp until the sheet gets too thin. If you are planning a long papermaking session, you can refill the tub as you go by adding a jug every now and then. There's still enough pulp in here for a few more sheets, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some larger A4 sheets using my A4 mold and deckle. Alrighty, that's 5 A4 sheets, but I'm getting a bit tired of the brown and yellow combo, and I want to add some more color. So I'm going to use these Who Gives a Crap wrappers. They're like a thin tissue paper, but super brightly colored. And I'm going to make some speckled chunks to add into the mix. So let's blend them up. Let's see what it looks like. So colorful, so many speckles. Looks great. Okay, you can see the sheet is getting quite thin. So we're running low on pulp. I'm going to make a couple of bigger sheets just to show you the A3 mold. This is my A3 mold and deckle. So let's make a few last super thin sheets using this big one. That sheet was also on the thin side, so we know that our paper making session is finished. But if you wanted to continue making more, you would just refill the tub with another jug of pulp and continue making paper. Now, because I'm making paper quite often, I will usually use the same tub of water for around 3 to 4 weeks until it gets a bit stanky. But in this case, because you might only be making paper in one session and then not again for a few weeks, we're going to sift the rest of the pulp out of the tub using our mold. This is better if you have a large mold, depending on the size of the tub. But even if we're doing it with the A6 mold and deckle, we're just going to use the A6 mold and you'll have a smaller tub and we're going to sift out all the remaining pulp. That way we're left with almost only water, and we can either tip that on our garden. That's what I like to do here. I'll just take it out and put it on the flowers, or in an evaporation situation, or you can keep it to use again for more paper making. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the mold only and we're going to dip it in, and any pulp, we're going to kind of scrunch that up and remove it from the mold and place it aside. To make this a little bit easier, what we can do is let the tub settle for a few minutes so all the pulp sinks to the bottom, and then we can scoop just water off the top. And then repeat that one more time, let the water settle again, scoop off the top layer of water, and that'll make it quicker to sift out the rest of the pulp. Okay, so now you can see there's only a couple of little chunks, little bits of pulp left, which means our tub is mostly water. We're going to clean our mold and deckle at the end of the session. Give it a nice shake out. Rinse the mold a bit. Now we have our leftover pulp here. I'm going to give it a bit of a sponge just to remove the water. And we're going to grab all of that and scrunch it up into a ball. And there we have our lovely leftover pulp ball from today's batch. You can either keep that as a memento, or you can even keep it for future paper making. Once it dries out, all you need to do is chuck that in some water, give it a swirl, and it'll turn straight back into pulp. And so that's how handmade recycled paper is made. But now we have a whole bunch of wet sheets. Mine are here on the drying rack. Yours might be pegged up or wherever you've got space to lay them out to dry. Depending on the temperature and humidity, sheets will take longer or shorter to dry. In summer, in the garage, sheets might dry overnight and then be ready to flatten the next day. During winter, it usually takes around 2, 3, maybe 4 days for the sheets to dry. Having airflow is really important. That speeds up the drying process. So I like to place a fan on the sheets for a few hours a day just to speed that process up if needed. When your sheets are dry, we'll need to harvest, remove them from the transfer material, and then flatten them so they're ready to get creative on. So I'll be back in a couple of days. Yo, so it's been a couple of days and our sheets are now dry. The next thing we'll need to do is harvest them and then peel them from the transfer material. Depending on what transfer material you're using, sometimes the sheets will curl up during drying. These ones were on the acetate and you can see they've curled up a bit, but they will flatten out once we put them under something heavy. The sheets that were pressed onto the old t-shirt scraps didn't curl up, so as you can see, it depends on what transfer material you use, but they're all going to turn out awesome. So let's harvest them from the drying rack. Now we have all our sheets ready and dry, it's time to peel them off the transfer material. This step's very easy. We're going to take the sheet that's still connected to the acetate and we're just going to peel it straight off like so. Now we're going to do the same for the sheets that were dried onto the pieces of t-shirt. There we go. And I'll just do the same thing for all the bigger sheets that I made. Awesome, now we have our stack of freshly dried sheets of paper. They look so nice. But they do need to be flattened, so the next step is pressing the dry paper. If you have a book press or any kind of press, that's going to be really handy to press the dry sheets. But actually, you really just need something heavy to place on top of the sheets and let them flatten for a day or two. You could use some heavy books, a brick, a chunk of cement, place them under your... Anything heavy is great to put on top and let them flatten. This is my press, and I use this to press the sheets once they're dry. But for the purpose of this video, I'm not going to use the actual press. I'm just going to place some heavy things on top. So we're going to take our sheets and stack them up nicely here on top of each other. And then if you can, I like to place a piece of wood on top. But this could be replaced with a heavy book. So there we go, that's the stack of A4s. Now we're going to take the A6 sheets and do the same thing. Then we're going to take some books, place them on top. I'm also going to put these big chunks of wood on top. So now we have all our dry sheets under some heavy things. You can really use anything that's heavy to place on top of your stack, and that's going to flatten them out over a day or two, and then they'll be ready to make some art on. Dodgy. Hello! So, it's been another couple of days, and the sheets are nice and flat by now. So let's take them out and have a look. Here we go. A nice little stack of A6 sheets made from paper waste. They're looking really good and they're ready to make some art, write a letter, or any creative project you have in mind. You can probably tell if you've been watching along that the sheets look much lighter now that they're dry. When the pulp is wet, it definitely looks darker. So once your sheets dry, they'll always turn out about 50% lighter than what they look when they're wet. So now it's up to you to figure out what you're going to do on your recycled paper. I myself do a lot of drawing, painting, and lino printing on my sheets, but they're really great for all kinds of creative usage, and you've turned your waste into a beautiful sheet of paper. Thanks so much for watching along, and I hope you've learned something today. If you've never ever made paper or seen paper being made, then I'm really happy to show you the process in its full. But if you've made paper before, I hope you can pick up a few little tips and tricks from this video. And get pulpy, make some paper, and stay creative. I'll see you next time.